Hello, everyone, and welcome back. We are back with season 2 of Friday Chats from the studio, and we're here with a very illustrious guest, Miss Chhavi Sachdev. She has been, in many ways, the godfather of the podcasting industry. Many of our seminal podcasts, Cyrus Says, Made in India, you know these names. They owe their existence to this woman, and we are so happy that she's sitting down to talk with us today for the very first episode of this new season. I cannot wait to get started talking to her because I'm a podcast producer, and I know I'm going to learn so much from her. So with all that out of the way, let's get into it. Ms. Sachdev, thank you so much for sitting down with me.
It is absolutely my pleasure. Can I convince you to just call me Chhavi, please?
Yes, absolutely. We did this already on email, by the way.
No, you're very formal.
Yes. But yes, let's get started, Chhavi. So the first question, and we actually covered this while we were getting ready. You started in 2008. This is something I saw on your website. This is something that everyone who knows you has talked about. And I want to know, what was it like back in 2008 when the infrastructure for being podcaster friendly just didn't exist? What was it like finding people? What was it like talking to them about podcasting and convincing them?
It was hard, but it was exciting and sometimes quite isolating. I really felt like I was adrift sometimes. I had points where I had to really explain what I did in such minute detail. And we had no analogies either. There was no Netflix that you could say, it's like audio for your consumption on the go. It's like where you watch, it's like watching Netflix wherever, whenever, from wherever, at any time. We didn't have those analogies. We just had terrestrial radio and cable television. So it was hard, and we didn't have apps to listen to podcasts. We used to have MP3 players that you had to physically connect a cable to download once a day from to sync it up. It was tedious. There's no question about that. But at the same time, it was fun. And we managed to do a lot of firsts, which also made it really exciting. And my whole goal was to create an audience for it who would then go on and make more podcasts. I felt like if you create an ecosystem, you build it, they will come. So it was exciting. It was also, of course, not something I could live on back then.
I mean, I feel like that's kind of still the case even now for a lot of young up-and-comers. But what was even the motivation to look at podcasting and go, this needs to be in India, this needs to be a thing here?
Well, it was a no-brainer for me. I'd moved back from America where there was a lot of very rich audio content available at any time. You didn't have to only listen to Bollywood music or cricket news or Bollywood news, which was all that we had along with advertising.
Yeah.
And I felt like I was being talked at or down at whenever I turned on the radio, and my brain was frying. And I had always leaned on audio as a companion for whatever I was doing, whether it was exercising or chores or chopping vegetables. And I felt like we all need that choice. So I was a believer, for better or for worse.
As a massive NPR fan, I can totally agree with you on that. NPR was, when I heard it for the first time, it was in a taxi and I was just like, what is this? And the driver was like, it's radio. And I was like, no, it isn't. I know radio. This isn't radio. It was the fact that this could exist blew my mind.
Absolutely. And everything under the sun could be conveyed through audio.
Exactly.
So I actually started out thinking I would do radio. I approached the big radio stations and they were having none of it. I got asked questions like, oh, you want to do science on the radio? Great. But can you do it in Mahmood's voice? Or can it be like Amitabh Bachchan? And I'm like, no. No. And then I tried community radio because I thought that would at least we could be in charge of our own programming and design it to be intelligent and also purposeful. But that also was challenging. And then I felt like there was no other option but to do it myself.
Yeah, it's a legal thing, isn't it, over here, that you cannot explore certain topics or subject matter in radio. You can only stick within news or sports or music and things like that.
So it isn't quite as cut and dried. My opinion is that people will not take risks. You have a formula that works. Why fix something that ain't broke, basically?
Right.
So you are restricted to you have to avoid a few topics, but that leaves everything else open if you have the gumption to take it on. And you can also play with formats. I mean, it's not like wait, don't tell me doesn't exist, or the moth storytelling hour doesn't exist. There are ways in which you can communicate things. Just because you're not broadcasting news doesn't mean you can't also tell good quality stories.
Exactly.
So
And so we talked about kind of the fact that the infrastructure and everything wasn't there, but also what about equipment? Because, obviously these kinds of mics and everything didn't exist back then. The software probably didn't even exist back then. So how did you even make them from an equipment and, just a technical standpoint?
So two things haven't changed since then. As I was a radio reporter before I started to do podcasts, and I still do radio reporting. My reporting equipment hasn't changed. So I had field recorders, Zooms, which now a lot of people use, even in studios. And I had a shotgun mic because I also collected field audio. So I used that for interviews. But we did need to then put it onto the laptop. And then Audacity did exist. So free open software. I mean, there was Adobe Audition, but open source software, or Audacity was it. So I taught myself Audacity and spent a lot of time doing some very bad sound engineering. But eventually, and then you had to upload it to an RS and then generate your own RSS feed. You had to burn that. I don't even know if people understand these steps and concepts.
I'm a 90s kid, so I do know what that
Okay.
is, but for maybe the Gen Zs, they're like, you set it on fire? You burnt it?
Yes. And then distributed it, and then
Yes.
really spent so much time trying to explain what it was so
Right.
that people would consume it.
And I imagine convincing them, like, what you're saying does make sense on some level, and just getting them to understand it. That's quite the challenge, I imagine.
I'm going to throw my mother under the bus, but she, for the longest time, just told people, I don't know what she does. I think she does something with websites and then like puts audio on them.
My mother's the same. Yeah, she's. But then, I've learned to kind of stop being so upset about it, because I take small comfort from the fact that when she touches something technological, it dies.
Oh,
So
it's not personal then.
it's not personal at all. It's just a fact. But as I mentioned in the intro, you are obviously responsible for some very seminal podcasts. And May Marian Thomas, who we've interviewed on the show before, she was one of them. What was it like when you met her? And what made you think this person can make a great podcast? And how did you develop it with her?
You've met her. She's a live wire.
She is.
She had that energy and she had conviction, but also she had some radio chops, and not just being an RJ, which is something we have really had to deal with production, because radio has set this weird benchmark of how people think they need to behave
Right.
in front of a microphone. And so when you find somebody who's authentic, Cyrus, for
Yeah.
instance, we also did India's first nonfiction storytelling podcast called Tall Tales Take Away.
Yes.
It still exists. Working with people who tell their own stories in their own voices is, when you see it, you know it. And May definitely was one of those people.
Yes, she was quite the force of nature when I was speaking with her. And but then it's like, obviously when I met her, it was at this stage where she has not only started the podcast, she has built it, and now she's also kind of taking a leaf out of your book and developing other people's podcasts as well. So when she was starting out, did she having come from radio, did she need to be molded in any specific way to get into that groove of podcasting, or was it like a duck to water type situation?
It was the latter. So she had worked in the UK in
Yes.
radio that was not Bollywood FM stuff. So she had the sensibility of what's possible. She was exposed to it and knew what she wanted to do. She was very passionate about indie music at the time and wanted to develop that show. And we were very happy to set her on her path.
And I love that there's still people out there building and developing podcasters, because I remember there's still to this day, there's a lot of young podcasters who come to me and they'll say, we approached an IVM, or we approached, so and so, and we gave them our idea. But then they said that we're looking at building our own originals. So we're not really interested in developing your project right now. Do you feel that with the sort of slow growth of podcasting companies and the corporatization of it, if you will, that it has almost become, ironically enough, a little harder for young podcasters who have a decent idea to get in and get up to the level?
I think you're really tapping into what's going on. At one point, it really felt like the Wild West. Everybody was out panning for gold, and you could get noticed, you could get famous, you could probably not get rich, but still have a measure of success. And because it has mushroomed so quickly, sorry, I'm mixing my metaphors like crazy. You can get lost in the woods now. It has become so challenging. And if you get noticed by one of the aggregators, you have a higher chance. But marketing is so hard and there's so little money in it, especially for if you indie podcasters, let's call them,
Yeah.
that it's just getting harder and harder. If you don't have the infrastructure, time, or the money, chances are you'll not really get very far.
Yeah, that does seem to be the case because it really has become a money game, and money is what gets you farther than your talent. And that also just reminded me about the fact that there was the Indian Audio Summit Awards that recently happened, and now there's a whole segment dedicated just to podcasts.
Podcasting, yeah.
When you were starting, did you ever think that that would be a thing? There'd be podcast awards in India.
Well, I had hoped for it. I've always been optimistic,
Yeah.
but I'm excited that this is happening finally. I've been on the jury for a bunch of awards, in fact, that have now got podcasting verticals. So it's nice, and it's even grown. So one of them, I think it's called the Orange Flame, or the Women's Web.
Women's Web, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
So they, in their first year, just had one podcasting award. And then the second year, they had so many entries that we had to divvy it up because I felt like we couldn't put them all in one category. And so we really changed it to if you have a production team, then you are more like a professional podcast. So you are in a different category because you have more resources,
Mhm.
money. And if you're an independent podcaster, then we judge you on a different set of criteria. And it's very heartening that there's so many people out there.
And actually, when before the Summit Awards happened, we were actually contacted by someone from the organization. And maybe, I don't know whether it's just because of how things have progressed, but we didn't really know what to make of it at first because, we at first we were a little confused. Like, there's awards for podcasts that exists. And then secondly, we didn't really know whether they were asking us to submit or whether they were asking us to give money or what the deal was. So we were a little confused on that front. So I was wondering, like, how do these awards actually work? How do they find the nominees or whatever it is? Is it like every do companies have to submit their podcast for consideration, or is it that it's a free for all and the jury has to go and find the shows?
You have to ask for submissions. So within like Women's Web, obviously they tap into their own network. For the summit, there I think was an entry fee, and you had to submit your podcast. There are others like that. We did one with Audio Train, which was again within their network. So they reached out to people and then asked people to submit. And again, they were overwhelmed with the number of entries. So pretty cool. Just to circle back, though, we were talking about young people, and I'm hoping somebody who's listening is not discouraged because what I tell people in my workshops is that you have to figure out your own measure of success. You may not become famous, you may not have 50,000 downloads per episode. So you think about what you're looking for. If you're looking for engagement or a really niche group of people that you connect with, and you think that's a good enough reason to go for it or have your voice out there, then do. So
It's exactly that, and I really hope people take that message to heart because so many people that we talk to, they're all about getting mainstream success, and we're trying to convince them. You have to go niche to find a dedicated audience, and that's a foundation that you can build on. Because if you're just trying to hit everyone at once, then you're not going to get anywhere because there's already people existing who have done that. That is already gone for the taking pretty much. um,
exactly.
and it's a shame when people, they don't listen and they kind of tune it out because you have some genuinely good ideas and some genuinely talented people who are losing out on possibly finding a really good footing in podcasting.
I have this anecdote that I share in my workshops, and it's something I heard at a conference where he told us about how his mother listens to a knitting podcast. The podcast is not successful by any standard measure. I think it's got 2,000 downloads per episode. But those listeners are so connected that they have gone on a cruise together.
Yeah.
This is a really dedicated, focused segment that you've got a captive audience, and then they've monetized it. They've done really well. That's a fantastic success story to me.
Exactly. And I didn't even know that there was such a thing as a knitting podcast.
Isn't there a podcast on anything?
There's a podcast on anything. Let's talk about the producing aspect of it, because this
Sure.
is something that is relevant to me. Like even just now when we were setting up, you knew how to talk to the sound recordist. You knew how to talk to, you knew the jargon and everything. And do you feel that that is important from a producer standpoint to be able to understand that? And what kind of a relationship do you feel needs to happen between the engineer and the producer?
I don't know if there's a correct answer to this, but yes, I do get it because I had to sort of learn it myself first. And then I was lucky enough to actually work with proper engineers in a proper studio. So I picked up the jargon there. And it's been super helpful because then I can be the intermediary between the talent, the voice, then the people coming up with the content, and then the people who are going to make it sound amazing. So I used to do it myself, and I'm competent, but I'm not amazing at it. And I'd really rather let the qualified people who enjoy it and do it so much faster take care of all aspects that they are better at than me. So I'm very happy producing.
And that actually leads into another question that I had, which was, when it comes to the sort of the final vision, if you will, of what the podcast will be, who has the most control over that? Is it the podcast host, or is it the producer? And does there need to be some kind of synergy for that between the two of them?
Ideally, yes, there should be synergy. So I do two different types of production. I do some production for corporate clients, and we really try to get on the same page before we start. And I give them samples and I walk them through my process, which I have refined over many years. And I know what works for me. And I feel like it's my job to lead them through it, to make sure that it is an efficient working system. There have been times when there have been clashes, and honestly, the client wins. And all I can do at that point is point out what would be the best case or worst case scenario. And sometimes they defer to me, and sometimes they just have a mandate that they can't get out of. And I respect that. But that's very few and far between. Mostly it is the producer, that's me, who really drives it. I like to tell people that I work with, it's like being the director of a movie. We don't call it a director, but honestly, if you're coming with me on this journey, we're doing this together, our vision has to match, and let me help you sound as good as you can.
Yeah. So if we were to use that analogy of because I imagine a lot of podcast hosts or the people who have the idea and they come to you with it, they might feel, I'm the person with the idea. I should be the director of it, if so to speak. Do you ever feel like you need to convince them to trust you with it, or do you feel that it is their idea, so let's go with what they're saying, but let's figure out how to work with what they're thinking?
Maybe I've been really lucky because we've never been in a situation where we're at loggerheads where it's like my way or the highway. So usually there's dialogue and we come up with a middle ground. There have been a couple of hosts so if I'm coming on as a consultant, I assume they respect my knowledge and my vision, and that we can come to some sort of understanding about what works and why, and they trust me. So I'm working with somebody right now, for instance, and we're really shaping the focus and tone. But I feel like the respect goes both ways. They know the content, but I know the craft. And so I feel like it's a really good synergy. And, knock on wood, it's not been contentious this far in all these years.
And what is the sort of the planning phase like? Because a lot of young podcasters who are maybe going it on their own, they might think it's a question of, they write an episode and then they go into it. But it does require a lot of planning, not just for that one episode, but maybe for an entire season or
Oh,
for an
yes.
entire year. And I was just curious, what are the various steps of the planning process, and what advice would you give to a young podcaster who's planning to do a podcast? What are the things that they need to do, or what are the steps that they need to make sure that they've checked off their list before they can actually get into the recording phase?
So that's 3 hours of workshop and many handouts that you're asking me to condense into a single answer. What I do tell all the young people who attend my workshops or whom I work with is that the creative part of it is such a minuscule portion. The rest of it really is about planning, and I can't stress that enough. We spend an hour on planning and strategizing. I give them homework on figuring out a vision, a mission, making a wish list of topics or guests or both that they're planning to work on, figuring out their pipeline. I really stress having a pipeline and having a lot of episodes in the bank before you start publishing. My students and clients almost never get that, but I have learned through experience, and I'm adamant, even with clients, like we have to have 50% of these things recorded and mastered before I'm even scheduling them. We're not doing breaking news. So, it's not that like we have to publish tomorrow or today. We talk about set up, good equipment, radio manners, practicing, getting comfortable with your own voice on the mic. A lot of people don't like how they sound. And a lot of people think they need classes. And I get asked so many times, do I need to go for like audition lessons or elocution or coaching and things like that? So I discourage that, of course.
Right.
And also just all getting processes in place so that when you are doing an episode, you've got a template that you can then apply to all the rest of your episodes to make life less complicated. Because if you're an indie producer, you are doing everything. You're the intern, you're the researcher, you're the narrator, you're the scripter, you're the editor, you're the mixer, the master, and then marketing and production and distribution. So, and the wallet.
Oof.
And so planning is what I do is I try to templatize all of it and give them a blueprint of how to prepare so that then they can focus on the fun part. And I also tell people the more you prepare and get it done, when you're finally out with your episodes, you can have fun with it rather than drowning in admin and logistics and putting it up and scheduling and finding keywords and doing all that stuff. So yeah, plan. You can't get around it.
So it sounds like, the one and only step that seems to exist is attend one of Chhavi's workshops, because then you're basically set for life, pretty much.
Sure, yes.
So, and do you feel that, podcast companies, do you feel that they're doing enough to help young podcasters? Or do you feel they could do more? And specifically, what could they be doing more to help young podcasters?
So I know a couple of companies are doing a few things to help educate podcasters and help them build capacity. They're also, in a big way, helping publicize podcasting, which was not happening until Spotify came into the scene. There were missed opportunities everywhere. The networks did not do enough to even let people know what podcasts are so that people can then make them or have the platform or the opportunity. So providing a platform, providing free access, helping with trainings is a lot already. And I'm grateful that it's raised the profile of podcasting and possibly, hopefully, the quality of podcasting also. Could they do more? Certainly. I think maybe we should distinguish between indie podcasters and commissioned podcasters. Maybe we could be more transparent about money. Maybe we could have better marketing tools for indie podcasters. Maybe we can have platforms that marry potential advertisers and agencies who can help with getting funding for indie podcasters, not just making everybody chase a commission from a big network, which is just impossible for most people.
Yeah.
Most people have a day job besides which. And you're putting your blood, sweat, and tears and planning resources and time and effort into making a podcast. After that, to pitch it and sell it, it's just a huge ask. So there's a lot that could be done to encourage them.
And one final question, we'll end with this one. When it comes to, let's say, someone coming in through the door and saying, "Hi, I have an idea for a podcast," what is the, let's say the top 3 qualities that you think they need where you would say, "I think this could work. I think they can make something special when we work together"?
So authenticity, the ability to articulate themselves and their idea well, that will translate into audio. And I don't know if this counts as a single quality, but they need to have done the research to have found a niche or be open to really honing their idea to be very specific. You cannot just have, I'm going to do a show which is a freewheeling chat about this because I like it.
Yes.
It's not going to work unless you are such a celebrity that people are just going to listen to anything you say because that's who you are.
Yeah, that is sadly the case where we've had so many people call and say, we're going to talk to the business leaders, and it's always a case of, well, do you know these leaders? Do you, and if you're going to talk to them, what's your spin on it? What's your unique spin on it that will make people want to listen to you? And they're usually stumped. And it's just like, okay, thank you very much for your call.
I can't tell you how many companies contact me and their basic idea is we're going to have our CXO interview CXOs.
Yes. We have done those as well.
Mm.
The money is good sometimes. So we've usually made our decisions sometimes based on that. But Chhavi, thank you so much for coming on the show. And I learned so much. And I'm sure people who are listening and people who are thinking of getting started with podcasting, they're going to learn so much. Is there any place that they can reach out to you and contact you and possibly ask some questions that I might have missed?
Sure. So I have a website that needs severe updation, sonologue.com, sonologue.com. And my email is Chhavi, CHHAVI at sonologue.com. I don't check my Instagram messages very often, but we're on Instagram, LinkedIn. You found me on LinkedIn.
I did
and
find you on
then I immediately said, please email me because like weeks go by before I check LinkedIn again. And email is good. And my website, there is a contact form. And when there are workshops coming up, I will post that. So
and you
happy
also
to have people join.
You mentioned you're part of a group as well.
Of course. So the Mumbai Indie Podcasters Unite. And anybody who's making a podcast, feel free to join us. We meet in real life and we have a WhatsApp group. We don't do promotions. That's our only thing. Like you can't just post a link and be like, here's my new podcast episode. We're not about that. We're really about helping each other grow, sharing resources and networks, and then maybe getting a beer.
Awesome.
once in a while.
Awesome. Well, I'm sure this your group will expect, I think, what is it? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 new members,
Yay!
I think, by the end of the day.
All podcasters are welcome.
All podcast. Awesome. Chhavi, thank you so much. And
my pleasure.
This is Vedant Naik from Friday Chats from the Studio, signing off.